The flames danced against the night sky like demons celebrating their feast, and in that moment, Maria Santos knew her life was about to change forever. She had been walking home from her double shift at the diner, her feet aching in worn-out sneakers, when she heard the screams piercing through the crackling inferno that had once been the most exclusive mansion in Beacon Hill. What she didn't know was that inside that burning palace lived secrets that would shake the very foundations of everything she believed about justice, family, and the invisible threads that connect us all. Before we dive into this incredible story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about fate and redemption, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one don't come around every day, and trust me, you're going to want to be here for what comes next. Drop a comment below telling me about a time when you helped a stranger, because Maria's story might just change how you see those moments forever. Maria Santos was 34 years old and had been invisible her entire life. Not literally, of course, but in all the ways that mattered in a city like Boston, where your zip code determined your worth and your accent revealed your destiny. She cleaned office buildings before dawn, served coffee and eggs to businessmen who never looked her in the eye during the day, and stocked shelves at a convenience store until midnight. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, all to keep a roof over her head and send money back to her mother in El Salvador. That Tuesday night in October, she was bone-tired as she walked down Marlborough Street, a route she'd taken 1,000 times before. The elegant brownstones and manicured gardens of Beacon Hill always made her feel like an intruder, even on the public sidewalk. She kept her head down, her worn jacket pulled tight against the autumn chill, invisible as always. But then she smelled it. Smoke, thick, acrid smoke that made her eyes water and her throat burn. She looked up to see flames erupting from the third-floor windows of a massive Victorian mansion, its Gothic towers and ornate stonework now silhouetted against an orange glow that painted the entire street in hellish light. People were already gathering on the sidewalk, their faces illuminated by the fire's glow, some recording with their phones, others calling 911. Maria heard the distant wail of sirens, but they sounded too far away, too slow for what was happening in front of her. That's when she heard it. A child's scream, high and desperate, cutting through the roar of the flames like a knife through her heart. "There's someone still inside," she shouted to the crowd, but they just stared at her, this small Latina woman in a stained uniform, as if she were speaking a foreign language, which, to them, she might as well have been. "The fire department's coming," someone said dismissively. "They'll handle it." But Maria could hear that scream getting weaker, more desperate. She looked at the faces around her, all frozen in that peculiar paralysis that comes when tragedy becomes spectacle. Rich people in expensive coats, watching a house burn like it was entertainment, waiting for professionals to solve the problem while a child's life hung in the balance. Without thinking, without planning, without considering the consequences, Maria Santos ran toward the burning mansion. "Are you insane?" someone shouted behind her, but she was already pushing through the ornate iron gate, already running up the stone steps to the massive front door. The heat hit her like a physical blow as she reached for the door handle. It was unlocked, and she pushed it open to find herself in a grand foyer filled with smoke so thick she could barely see 3 feet in front of her. Crystal chandeliers hung like ghosts in the haze, and a sweeping staircase curved upward into the inferno above. The screams were coming from the 2nd floor. Maria pulled her jacket over her nose and mouth and started climbing. Each step felt like walking into an oven, the heat growing more intense, the smoke thicker. Her eyes streamed tears, her lungs burned, but she kept climbing because somewhere above her a child was dying. The 2nd floor was a maze of hallways and doors, all of them closed, the smoke so dense now that she had to feel her way along the walls. The screaming had stopped, and that terrified her more than the fire itself. "Hello!" she called out, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Where are you?" Nothing. She tried door after door, room after room, each one empty or already consumed by flames. The heat was becoming unbearable, her vision blurring, her strength fading. She knew she had maybe minutes before the smoke overcame her completely. Then she heard it, not a scream this time, but a weak cough, barely audible over the roar of the fire. She followed the sound to a door at the end of the hallway, and when she pushed it open, she found him. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, huddled in the corner of what looked like a library, surrounded by burning books and collapsing shelves. He was unconscious, his small body limp, his face covered in soot. Maria didn't hesitate. She scooped him up in her arms, surprised by how light he was, how fragile. He couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds, all sharp angles and delicate bones. As she lifted him, she caught a glimpse of his face in the firelight, and something about his features struck her as familiar, though she couldn't place why. Getting back down the stairs was like descending into hell itself. The fire had spread, the smoke was thicker, and she was carrying dead weight in her arms. Twice she stumbled, nearly falling, the boy's body slipping in her grasp. Her lungs felt like they were filled with molten lead. Her vision was going dark around the edges, but she kept moving because stopping meant they both died. She burst through the front door just as the fire department arrived, their trucks screaming up the street with lights blazing. The crowd that had been watching from a safe distance suddenly surged forward, everyone wanting to be part of the drama now that it was safe. Maria collapsed on the front lawn, still clutching the boy, both of them gasping for air that tasted like freedom. Paramedics rushed over, taking the child from her arms, checking his vital signs, loading him onto a stretcher. "You saved his life," one of the EMTs told her as they worked on the boy. Another few minutes and it would have been too late. Maria nodded, too exhausted to speak, watching as they wheeled the boy toward the ambulance. In the flashing lights and chaos, she saw him open his eyes for just a moment, looking directly at her with a gaze that seemed far too old and knowing for such a young face. Then the ambulance doors closed, and he was gone. That's when she noticed the man standing beside the ambulance, talking urgently to the paramedics. He was tall and distinguished, maybe 50 years old, with graying hair and the kind of expensive suit that cost more than Maria made in 6 months. Even in the chaos, even with soot on his clothes and tears on his face, he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of wealth and power. As the ambulance pulled away, the man turned and scanned the crowd, his eyes searching. When his gaze fell on Maria, still sitting on the grass in her stained uniform, he started walking toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep and cultured, tinged with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Were you the one who went into the house?" Maria nodded, struggling to her feet. Up close, she could see the man's face more clearly, and she was struck by how much he looked like the boy she'd just saved. The same dark eyes, the same strong jawline, the same aristocratic features. "You saved my son," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. "You saved Michael." Before Maria could respond, before she could even process what he was saying, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card and what looked like a checkbook. "I'm Jonathan Whitmore," he said, as if the name should mean something to her. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. Please, let me give you something, anything. What's your name? Where do you live? I want to make sure you're taken care of." Maria stared at the checkbook, at this man who thought he could solve everything with money, and something inside her recoiled. She'd risked her life because it was the right thing to do, because a child was in danger, not because she expected a reward. "I don't want anything," she said quietly, backing away from him. "Please," Jonathan insisted, following her. "You don't understand. You saved my son's life. Let me at least cover your medical expenses, or give you something for your trouble." I said I don't want anything. The crowd was pressing closer now, reporters arriving with cameras, police trying to establish a perimeter. Maria felt trapped, overwhelmed by the attention, by the lights and noise and chaos. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. "At least tell me your name." Jonathan called after her as she started walking away. "Please, I need to know who saved my son." But Maria Santos was already disappearing into the crowd, melting back into the invisibility that had protected her all her life. She walked quickly down Marlborough Street, away from the cameras and questions and the weight of Jonathan Whitmore's gratitude. Behind her, she could hear him calling out, asking people if they knew who she was, where she'd gone. But Maria was already gone, swallowed up by the darkness between streetlights, just another shadow in a city full of them. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her disappearance would haunt Jonathan Whitmore for years to come. That he would hire private investigators, post rewards, search hospital records and immigration databases, all trying to find the mysterious woman who had saved his son and then vanished without a trace. And what neither of them knew was that their paths would cross again in ways that would challenge everything they believed about justice, family, and the true meaning of heroism. 3 years passed like pages turning in a book Maria never wanted to read. The fire, the boy, the grateful father offering money she didn't want. All of it became just another memory filed away in the back of her mind. Another night when she'd done what needed doing and moved on. But life has a way of testing us, of taking our small acts of courage and weaving them into tapestries we never could have imagined. Maria's mother, Elena, had been diagnosed with cancer. The treatments in El Salvador were primitive at best, and the doctors there had given her 6 months to live. But there was hope. They said if she could get to the United States, if she could access the kind of medical care that money could buy. So Maria did what she'd always done. She worked harder. She took on a 4th job, cleaning houses in the wealthy neighborhoods of Cambridge and Beacon Hill. She saved every penny, slept 4 hours a night, ate 1 meal a day, all to bring her mother north for treatment that might save her life. It was during one of these house-cleaning jobs that fate decided to shuffle the deck again. The address was on Commonwealth Avenue, another mansion in another wealthy neighborhood, another house where Maria would be invisible while she scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans. The agency had told her the family was traveling, that she'd be working alone, which was fine by her. She preferred the solitude, the quiet efficiency of working without having to navigate the awkward dynamics of being the help. She let herself in with the key the agency had provided, and immediately felt the familiar weight of other people's wealth pressing down on her. This house was even grander than most, with soaring ceilings and marble floors, oil paintings that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. But as she moved through the rooms, something began to feel familiar. The layout, the architectural details, something about the way the light fell through the tall windows. It wasn't until she reached the library that it hit her like a physical blow. She'd been here before, 3 years ago, in the smoke and flames, carrying a dying boy through corridors filled with fire. This was the house. This was the mansion that had burned, rebuilt now but unmistakably the same. Maria stood frozen in the doorway of the library, remembering the heat and smoke, the weight of the boy in her arms, the desperate race down burning stairs. The room looked completely different now, restored to its former glory, but she could still smell the phantom smoke, still hear the echo of that child's screams. She was so lost in the memory that she almost didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. Someone was home. Maria's heart raced as she heard voices, a man and what sounded like a young boy, getting closer. The agency had told her the house would be empty. She wasn't supposed to encounter the family. She grabbed her cleaning supplies and looked for somewhere to hide, somewhere to wait until they passed. But it was too late. "Dad, I told you I could walk up here myself," came a voice from the hallway, young but with the confidence that comes from privilege. "I know you can, Michael, but humor your old man. It's not every day my son gets accepted to Harvard at 16. Maria's blood turned to ice. Michael. The boy's name was Michael. They appeared in the library doorway before she could move, before she could think, before she could disappear back into the invisibility that had always protected her. The man was older now, his hair more grey than black, but she recognized him immediately. Jonathan Whitmore, the grateful father who had tried to give her money, who had called after her as she disappeared into the night 3 years ago, and beside him stood the boy she had saved. Except he wasn't a boy anymore. Michael was taller now, maybe 12 years old, with the same dark eyes and aristocratic features, but alive, healthy, vibrant in a way that made Maria's chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. For a moment, nobody moved. Jonathan's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the Latina woman in a cleaning uniform standing in his library, and something flickered across his face, a recognition that he couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," Maria said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The agency said you were traveling. I'll come back another time." She started to move toward the door, but Jonathan stepped into her path, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Wait," he said slowly. "Have we met before?" Maria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. "No, sir." "I don't think so." But Michael was staring at her now, his young face scrunched in concentration, and suddenly his eyes went wide. "Dad," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Dad, I think that's her." "Her who?" "The woman from the fire. The one who saved me." The words hung in the air like a held breath, and Maria watched as understanding dawned on Jonathan's face. His mouth fell open, his eyes filled with tears, and he took a step toward her as if she were a ghost made flesh. "It's you," he whispered. "After all this time, it's really you. Now here's where I need you to pause and think about something. Imagine being in Maria's position right now. You've spent 3 years trying to forget that night, trying to stay invisible, and suddenly you're face to face with the very people whose lives you changed forever. What would you do? Would you run again? Or would you stay and face whatever comes next? Let me know in the comments, because Maria's choice in this moment is about to change everything." Maria felt trapped, cornered by recognition and gratitude she'd never wanted. Every instinct told her to run, to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. But something in Michael's eyes, some echo of that frightened child she'd carried through the smoke, kept her frozen in place. "I've been looking for you," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "For 3 years, I've been trying to find you. I hired investigators. I posted rewards. I never stopped hoping that someday I could thank you properly for what you did." "You don't need to thank me," Maria said, backing toward the door. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Michael spoke up, his young voice surprisingly firm. "Not anyone. There were dozens of people on the street that night, and they all just watched. You're the only one who came for me." Jonathan nodded, wiping tears from his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you gave me that night? You gave me my son. You gave me everything that matters in this world." Maria felt the weight of their gratitude like a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, exactly why she'd run that night. She didn't want to be anyone's hero, she just wanted to be left alone. "I have to go," she said, moving toward the door again. "Please don't," Jonathan said, and there was something desperate in his voice that made her stop. "Please. I know this is overwhelming. I know you probably want to leave, but I've waited 3 years for this moment. Just give me 5 minutes. Please." Maria looked at him, this wealthy man with tears in his eyes, begging her for 5 minutes of her time. She thought about her mother, dying in a hospital bed thousands of miles away, about the money she needed for treatments, about the 4th job she'd taken cleaning houses like this one. 5 minutes, she said quietly. Jonathan's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, please. Sit down. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Water? I'm fine." They sat in the restored library, surrounded by books and luxury, the 3 of them occupying different worlds that had collided in the most unlikely way. Jonathan kept staring at Maria as if he couldn't quite believe she was real, while Michael watched her with the curious intensity of a boy trying to reconcile his memories with reality. "Oh, I need you to understand something," Jonathan said finally. "That night, when you saved Michael, you didn't just save my son. You saved my entire world. Michael is everything to me. He's brilliant, he's kind, he's going to change the world someday. And none of that would have been possible without you." Maria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "And anyone would have done the same thing." "But they didn't," Michael said. "I remember that night. I remember lying in that room, feeling the smoke filling my lungs, knowing I was going to die. And then you appeared like an angel, and you carried me out of hell itself." "I'm not an angel," Maria said firmly. "And I'm just a person who happened to be walking by." "You're wrong," Jonathan said. "You're a hero. And I've spent 3 years trying to find you so I could tell you that, so I could thank you properly, so I could make sure you were taken care of." There it was again, the assumption that money could solve everything, that gratitude had to be measured in dollars and cents. Maria felt that familiar recoil, that instinctive rejection of charity she didn't want. "I told you that night, I don't want anything from you." "But why?" Jonathan asked, genuinely puzzled. "You saved my son's life. Let me help you with something. Anything. What do you need?" Maria almost laughed at the irony. What did she need? She needed $50,000 for her mother's cancer treatment. She needed health insurance and job security and a future that didn't involve working herself to death for pennies. She needed 1,000 things that this man could provide without even noticing the expense. But she also needed her dignity, her independence, her sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to anyone else's charity. "I don't need anything," she lied. Jonathan studied her face, and she could see the wheels turning in his mind, the calculation of a man who'd built a fortune by reading people and situations. "You're working 4 jobs, he said quietly. Maria's head snapped up. "How do you know that?" "The cleaning agency. I called them when I saw you here, asked about their employee. They told me you work for 3 other companies too. 4 jobs, 7 days a week. Nobody does that unless they're desperate." Maria felt exposed, vulnerable, like he'd stripped away all her careful defenses with a single phone call. "And that's none of your business." "You're right, it's not. But I'm making it my business. You saved my son, and you're working yourself to death while I live in a mansion. That's not right." "Life isn't right," Maria said sharply. "That doesn't mean you get to fix it with your checkbook." "Why not?" Michael asked, his young voice cutting through the tension. "And if my dad can help you, why won't you let him?" Maria looked at this boy, this child she'd saved, and saw something in his eyes that reminded her of herself at that age. The same fierce independence, the same stubborn pride that had kept her going through years of struggle. "Because I don't want to owe anyone anything," she said finally. "I don't want to be someone's charity case or good deed. I want to earn what I have." "But you did earn it," Jonathan said. "You earned it the night you ran into a burning building to save my son. You earned it with your courage and your compassion and your willingness to risk everything for a stranger." Maria felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back angrily. She didn't want to cry in front of these people, didn't want to show weakness or need. "I have to go," she said, standing up abruptly. "Wait," Jonathan said, rising as well. "At least tell me your name, please. I've been calling you the Angel for 3 years. I'd like to know what to call you." Maria hesitated at the door, her hand on the handle. What harm could it do? They already knew where she worked, already knew she was struggling. Her name was just a word. "Maria," she said quietly. "Maria Santos." "Maria," Jonathan repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "It's beautiful. It suits you." She almost smiled at that, almost let herself feel the warmth of his kindness. But then she remembered where she was, who she was, and the vast gulf that separated their worlds. "Goodbye, Mr. Whitmore," she said, and walked out of the library, out of the mansion, back into the invisible world where she belonged. But as she walked away, she didn't see Jonathan Whitmore pull out his phone and make a call that would change everything. The next morning, Maria arrived at the diner for her first shift to find her manager, Carol, waiting for her with a strange expression on her face. "Maria, honey, I need to talk to you," Carol said, leading her to a corner booth away from the other employees. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, nothing like that. It's just, well, this is going to sound crazy, but someone paid off your mother's medical bills." Maria felt the world tilt sideways. "What?" "I got a call this morning from some fancy law firm in downtown Boston. They said an anonymous benefactor had heard about your situation and wanted to help. They've arranged for your mother to be transferred to Mass General, all expenses paid, including travel and accommodation for you." Maria's hands started shaking. "That's impossible. Nobody knows about my mother except she'd never told anyone about her mother's cancer. Not Carol, not her other employers, not anyone. She'd kept that pain locked away inside herself, carried it alone like she carried everything else. But Jonathan Whitmore had resources. Jonathan Whitmore could find out anything he wanted to know about anyone. There's more," Carol continued. "They're offering you a job. Administrative assistant at Whitmore Industries. Full benefits. Salary that's 3 times what you make here. They want you to start Monday." Maria felt like she couldn't breathe. Whitmore Industries. Of course, Jonathan Whitmore hadn't just tried to help her. He'd investigated her entire life, found her weaknesses, her desperate needs, and crafted a solution she couldn't refuse. "I can't," she said. But even as she said it, she thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed in San Salvador, about the treatments that could save her life, about the opportunity to finally stop working 4 jobs just to survive. "Maria, honey, this is a miracle. This is the kind of thing that happens in movies, not real life. Someone wants to help you, and you'd be crazy not to take it." But Maria knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was. This wasn't charity. It was obligation. Jonathan Whitmore was trying to buy her gratitude, to turn her heroism into a transaction she could never repay. And yet her mother was dying. That afternoon, Maria found herself standing outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Whitmore Industries, staring up at the building that represented everything she'd never been able to achieve. She'd come here to refuse the job, to tell Jonathan Whitmore that she didn't want his help, that she'd find another way to save her mother. But as she stood there, she realized she was lying to herself. There was no other way. She'd already exhausted every option, borrowed against every future, sacrificed everything she had. This was her mother's only chance. The lobby was all marble and steel, designed to intimidate and impress. Maria felt small and out of place in her worn jeans and faded jacket, but she walked to the reception desk anyway. "I'm here to see Mr. Whitmore," she said to the perfectly groomed woman behind the desk. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. But tell him Maria Santos is here. He'll see me." The receptionist looked skeptical, but she made the call anyway. Within minutes, Maria was being escorted to the top floor, to an office that was bigger than most people's apartments. Jonathan Whitmore stood behind a massive desk, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. He turned when she entered, and she saw relief and something like joy cross his face. "Maria, I wasn't sure you'd come." "You knew I would," she said. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you paid for my mother's treatment." Jonathan had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I know it seems manipulative, but I couldn't stand the thought of you suffering when I could help. You investigated me. You found out about my mother, about my jobs, about my entire life." "Yes, I did, and I'm not sorry for that either. You saved my son, Maria. You gave me everything that matters, and then you disappeared before I could thank you. Did you really think I was just going to let that go?" Maria walked to the windows, looking out at the city spread below her, at the harbor where ships came and went carrying cargo and dreams and desperate hopes. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "I don't want to be saved. I don't want to be anyone's project or charity case. I want to earn my way." "Then earn it," Jonathan said, moving to stand beside her. "The job offer is real. It's not charity. It's an opportunity. You'll work for it. You'll earn every penny. The only difference is that you'll be working for someone who knows what you're capable of. And what am I capable of? Courage, compassion, the kind of integrity that makes someone risk their life for a stranger. Those are rare qualities, Maria, rarer than you know. Maria turned to look at him, this wealthy man who seemed to see something in her that she'd never seen in herself. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. You work, you get paid, you help your mother get well. That's it. And you get what out of this?" Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the harbour. "Peace," he said finally. "For 3 years, I've carried the weight of unpaid debt. You gave me my son's life, and I couldn't give you anything in return. It's been eating at me, Maria. I need to balance the scales." Maria understood that feeling, that weight of obligation that pressed down on your shoulders until you could barely stand. She'd carried it her entire life, the debt she owed to her mother for sacrificing everything to give her a chance at a better life. "If I take this job," she said slowly, "I want to be clear about something. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for my mother. I understand. And I don't want special treatment. I don't want people to know why I'm here or what happened between us. I just want to work, of course. And if I decide this isn't working, if I want to leave, you won't try to stop me or guilt me into staying. You have my word." Maria took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into an unknown future. "When do I start?" The smile that spread across Jonathan's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Monday," he said. "Welcome to Whitmore Industries, Maria Santos." As she left the building that day, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, not just for her mother's recovery, but for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, her life could be something more than survival. What she didn't know was that her arrival at Whitmore Industries would set in motion a chain of events that would expose secrets, challenge assumptions, and ultimately reveal truths that would shake the very foundations of everything she thought she knew about justice and family. Because sometimes, when we think we're saving someone else, we're actually saving ourselves. And sometimes, the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the biggest secrets of all. But that's a story for what comes next, and trust me, you're not going to believe where this journey takes us. Maria's first day at Whitmore Industries was like stepping into an alien world. The 37th floor buzzed with the kind of quiet efficiency that only money could buy, where every surface gleamed and every employee looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. She'd been assigned to work as an administrative assistant in the corporate development department, a position that paid more in a month than she'd made in 6 months at all, her other jobs combined. Her supervisor was a woman named Patricia Hoffman, a sharp-eyed blonde in her 40s, who wore designer suits like armor and spoke in clipped, precise sentences that left no room for interpretation. "You'll be supporting our acquisition team," Patricia explained as she led Maria through a maze of cubicles and conference rooms. "We're always evaluating potential investments, and we need someone to help with research, documentation, and coordination." Maria nodded, trying to absorb the corporate jargon while fighting the feeling that everyone was staring at her. She'd bought new clothes for the job, but she still felt like an imposter in her discount store blazer and department store shoes. "One more thing," Patricia said, stopping at a desk near the window. "Mr. Whitmore has made it clear that you're to be treated like any other employee. No special consideration, no preferential treatment. I hope that's acceptable to you." "That's exactly what I want," Maria replied, and she meant it. The work was challenging but not impossible. Maria had always been smart, had always been a quick learner, and she threw herself into understanding the complexities of corporate finance and business development with the same determination that had carried her through 3 jobs and night school. But it was during her 3rd week at Whitmore Industries that she stumbled across something that would change everything. She was working late, trying to finish a report on potential acquisition targets in the healthcare sector, when she noticed a discrepancy in one of the files. A small community hospital in Roxbury was listed as a potential acquisition, but the financial projections didn't make sense. The hospital was profitable, served a vital community need, and had a solid reputation. So why was Whitmore Industries planning to buy it and immediately close it down? Maria dug deeper into the files, cross-referencing documents and financial reports, following a trail of paperwork that led her into the darker corners of corporate strategy. What she found made her stomach turn. Whitmore Industries wasn't just planning to close the hospital. They were planning to demolish it and build luxury condominiums on the site, displacing not just the hospital, but an entire community of low-income residents who depended on its services. The projected profits were enormous. The human cost was devastating. Maria sat at her desk in the empty office, staring at the documents spread before her, feeling like she'd been punched in the gut. This was what she was working for. This was the company that Jonathan Whitmore had built, the source of the wealth that had paid for her mother's treatment. She thought about the people in Roxbury who would lose their only source of healthcare, about the families who would be forced from their homes to make way for condos they could never afford. She thought about her own neighborhood, her own community, and how many times they'd been displaced and forgotten by people exactly like Jonathan Whitmore. The next morning, Maria requested a meeting with Patricia Hoffman. "I need to discuss the Roxbury Community Hospital acquisition," she said, sitting across from her supervisor in a sterile conference room. Patricia's expression didn't change. "That's above your pay grade. Maria, your job is to compile data, not question strategy. But the data doesn't support the strategy. The hospital is profitable and serves a vital community need. Closing it would be devastating to thousands of people. That's not our concern. Our concern is maximizing shareholder value. What about corporate responsibility? What about the impact on the community?" Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying Maria with cold calculation. "Let me give you some advice. You're new here. You're still learning how things work. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is a charity. This is a business, and business is about making money, even if it means destroying people's lives. People's lives are destroyed every day by market forces beyond anyone's control. At least we're being honest about it." Maria left the meeting feeling sick and angry and trapped. She needed this job, needed the money for her mother's ongoing treatment, but she couldn't stomach being part of something that would hurt so many people. That evening, she found herself standing outside Jonathan Whitmore's office, having taken the elevator to the executive floor without really planning what she would say. His assistant had gone home for the day, and she could see light under his door, could hear him talking on the phone. She knocked, and after a moment, he called for her to come in. Jonathan looked up from his desk with surprise and what might have been pleasure. "Maria, this is unexpected. Is everything all right? I need to talk to you about the Roxbury Hospital." His expression shifted, became more guarded. "What about it? You're planning to close it, to tear it down and build condos." Jonathan set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "That's confidential information, Maria. You shouldn't be looking at files above your clearance level. So it's true. It's business. It's what we do. It's wrong." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an accusation. Jonathan studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his options, deciding how to respond. "Sit down," he said finally. Maria remained standing. "Jerzy, I don't want to sit down. I want you to explain to me how the man whose son I saved can justify destroying a hospital that serves thousands of people who look like me. It's not that simple. It seems pretty simple to me. You buy the hospital, you close it, you make money, and poor people suffer. What am I missing?" Jonathan stood up and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. "Do you know what I was doing the night of the fire? Maria, the night you saved my son. I don't care what you were doing. I was at a board meeting. We were discussing this very acquisition, actually. I was so focused on the deal, so obsessed with the numbers and projections, that I almost missed my son's bedtime. If I hadn't come home when I did, if I hadn't been there to call 911, He turned to face her, and she could see pain in his eyes, genuine anguish that seemed to cut deeper than any business decision. You saved Michael that night, but you also saved me. You reminded me what really matters, and I've been trying to balance that ever since, trying to be the father Michael deserves while still running a company that employs thousands of people and supports countless families. By destroying other families? By making hard choices that you don't understand. The hospital is failing, Maria. It's been losing money for years, cutting services, laying off staff. We're not destroying it. We're putting it out of its misery. That's not what the financial reports say. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. What financial reports? The ones in the acquisition file. The hospital is profitable. It's been in the black for 3 consecutive years. That's impossible. Our due diligence showed. He stopped, his face going pale as understanding dawned. He moved to his computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard, pulling up files and spreadsheets. "Son of a bitch," he whispered. "What?" "The reports have been altered. Someone's been feeding us false information about the hospital's financial status." Maria moved closer to the desk, looking over his shoulder at the screen. "Who would do that? Someone who stands to profit from the acquisition. Someone who wants us to buy the hospital and close it down." Jonathan's phone buzzed, and he answered it without taking his eyes off the screen. Patricia, I need you in my office. Now." Within minutes, Patricia Hoffman appeared in the doorway, her usual composure intact, despite being called to the executive floor after hours. "You wanted to see me? I want you to explain why the financial reports on Roxbury Community Hospital don't match the data in our acquisition file." Patricia's expression didn't change, but Maria caught something in her eyes, a flicker of calculation that lasted only a moment. "I'm not sure what you mean. The hospital is profitable, Patricia. It has been for years. But the reports you've been giving me show massive losses. Care to explain the discrepancy? There must be some mistake in the data compilation. I'll have my team review." "Don't." Jonathan's voice was sharp, commanding. "Don't lie to me, Patricia. I've been in this business for 20 years. I know when someone's trying to manipulate me." Patricia glanced at Maria, and for the first time since she'd started working at Whitmore Industries, Maria saw something like fear in her supervisor's eyes. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Patricia said. "No, Maria stays. She's the one who discovered the discrepancy. She has a right to hear the explanation." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and Maria could almost see her calculating odds, weighing options, deciding whether to fight or surrender. "The hospital is profitable," she said finally, "but it won't be for long. The neighborhood is changing, gentrifying. The patient base is shifting to higher-income demographics who prefer private facilities. In 5 years, maybe less, Roxbury Community will be obsolete. So you falsified reports to justify an acquisition that would let us profit from that obsolescence. I positioned us to capitalize on inevitable market forces. You lied. I strategized." Jonathan stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Odile, you manipulated me into approving an acquisition that would destroy a functioning hospital and displace hundreds of families, all so you could make a profit on real estate speculation. It's what you pay me to do. Find opportunities, maximize returns, increase shareholder value. It's not what I pay you to do. It's certainly not what I pay you to lie about." Patricia straightened her shoulders, her composure returning. "Fine. You want the truth? The truth is that hospital serves people who don't matter to our bottom line. Poor people, immigrants, people without insurance or political influence. They're a drag on the healthcare system, and that hospital enables their dependence on charity care." Maria felt something cold and hard settle in her chest as she listened to Patricia reduce her entire community to a line item on a balance sheet. "Those people you're talking about," Maria said quietly, "they're my people, my family, my neighbors, my friends. They matter to me, and that's exactly why you shouldn't be involved in this decision," Patricia replied. "You're too emotionally invested to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture being profit at any cost. The bigger picture being economic reality. His sentiment doesn't pay salaries or fund research or keep companies competitive. Jonathan moved around his desk to stand beside Maria, and she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. "You're fired," he said simply. Patricia blinked, clearly not having expected such a swift resolution. "You're making a mistake, Jonathan. The board won't support this decision. They'll want to know why you're letting personal feelings override sound business judgment. Then I'll explain it to them. I'll tell them that I won't tolerate fraud and manipulation in my company, regardless of the potential profits." "And what about the Roxbury acquisition?" "Cancelled. Effective immediately." Patricia gathered her composure like a cloak, straightening her suit jacket and lifting her chin. "This isn't over, Jonathan. You think you can run a Fortune 500 company based on sentiment and social responsibility, but you're wrong. The market doesn't care about your conscience, and neither do your shareholders." She turned to Maria, her eyes cold and calculating. "And you think you've won something here, but you haven't. You've just cost this company millions of dollars and dozens of jobs. I hope your principles keep you warm when the layoffs start." Patricia walked out of the office with her head held high, leaving Maria and Jonathan alone with the weight of what had just happened. "I'm sorry," Maria said after a long moment. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause trouble. You prevented it. If we'd gone through with that acquisition based on false information, it would have been a disaster on every level. But she was right about one thing. I cost you money." Jonathan turned to look at her, and she was surprised to see something like pride in his eyes. "You know what you cost me, Maria? You cost me the chance to make a profit by destroying people's lives. And you know what you gave me in return? You gave me the chance to be the kind of man my son can be proud of." Maria felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back. "What happens now?" "Now we figure out how to turn this situation into something positive. The hospital needs investment and support to continue serving the community. Maybe instead of buying it to tear it down, we can buy it to build it up. You'd do that. I'd consider it. But I'd need someone to help me understand the community's needs, someone who knows what it's like to depend on a place like Roxbury Community Hospital." Maria looked at him. This wealthy man who was offering to turn a potential disaster into an opportunity for healing, and she felt something shift inside her chest. "I might know someone who could help with that," she said. Jonathan smiled, and for the first time since she'd started working at Whitmore Industries, Maria felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But their victory was short-lived, because Patricia Hoffman hadn't been working alone, and the forces arrayed against them were more powerful and more dangerous than either of them could have imagined. The real battle was just beginning. 2 weeks after Patricia's dismissal, Maria was working late when she noticed something wrong with her computer. Files were missing, emails had been deleted, and her access to certain databases had been revoked without explanation. She tried calling IT support, but they claimed to have no record of any changes to her account. She tried accessing the files from another computer, but found that her login credentials had been suspended. It was as if someone was systematically erasing her presence from the company's systems. The next morning, Maria arrived at work to find a security guard waiting at her desk. "Miss Santos, I need you to come with me." "What's going on?" "There are some questions about irregularities in your work. You're being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. "What kind of irregularities?" "I'm not authorized to discuss the details." "Please gather your personal belongings and surrender your access card." As Maria packed her few personal items into a cardboard box, she could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, could hear the whispered conversations and speculation. In the space of 10 minutes, she'd gone from employee to suspected criminal, escorted from the building like a common thief. She tried calling Jonathan, but his assistant told her he was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. She tried calling the next day, and the day after that, but somehow Jonathan Whitmore had become unavailable to take her calls. It wasn't until the end of the week that she understood what was happening. The letter arrived by certified mail, bearing the letterhead of Whitmore Industries' legal department. It accused her of corporate espionage, theft of proprietary information, and breach of confidentiality agreements. It demanded the return of any company documents in her possession and threatened criminal prosecution if she attempted to contact any current or former employees of the company. Maria read the letter 3 times before its full implications sank in. Someone was trying to destroy her, to discredit her and silence her before she could expose what she'd learned about the Roxbury Hospital acquisition. But who and why? The answer came to her as she sat in her small apartment, surrounded by the legal documents that threatened to destroy her life. Patricia Hoffman had been fired, but she hadn't been working alone. She'd had allies within the company, people who shared her vision of profit over principle, who saw Maria as a threat to their way of doing business, and they were willing to destroy her to protect their interests. Maria thought about fighting back, about hiring a lawyer and challenging the accusations. But lawyers cost money she didn't have, and she was up against a Fortune 500 company with unlimited resources and no apparent scruples about using them. She thought about going to the media, about exposing the corruption she'd uncovered. But who would believe her? A cleaning lady turned administrative assistant against one of Boston's most respected businessmen. Her word against theirs. She thought about giving up, about disappearing back into the invisible world where she'd spent most of her life. It would be easier, safer, less complicated. But then she thought about the people who depended on Roxbury Community Hospital, about the families who would be displaced if the acquisition went through, about the children who would grow up without access to healthcare because someone had decided their lives didn't matter. And she thought about Michael Whitmore, the boy she'd saved from a fire, and the man his father was trying to become. Maria Santos had spent her entire life being invisible, being overlooked, being dismissed as unimportant. But she'd also spent her entire life surviving, fighting, refusing to give up even when the odds were stacked against her. She wasn't about to start giving up now. The next morning, Maria did something she'd never done before. She called in sick to all her old jobs, the ones she'd returned to after being fired from Whitmore Industries, and she spent the day doing research. She went to the public library and used their computers to dig into public records, corporate filings, and news archives. She called former co-workers and asked careful questions about what had happened after she left. She reached out to community organizations in Roxbury and learned more about the hospital's role in serving the neighborhood. What she discovered was a web of corruption and manipulation that went far deeper than she'd imagined. Patricia Hoffman hadn't just falsified reports about the hospital's financial status. She'd been working with a real estate development company to artificially inflate property values in the surrounding neighborhood, driving out long-term residents and paving the way for gentrification. The hospital acquisition was just one piece of a larger scheme to transform Roxbury from a working-class community into an upscale enclave for wealthy professionals. And the profits from that transformation would be enormous for everyone involved. Everyone except the people who actually lived there. Maria spent 3 days documenting everything she could find, building a case that connected the dots between corporate greed and community destruction. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She called Jonathan Whitmore's direct line. "Maria?" His voice was filled with surprise and what sounded like relief. "Where have you been?" "I've been trying to reach you. Your legal department sent me a letter threatening to have me arrested if I contacted anyone at the company." "What letter?" "I don't know anything about a letter. The one accusing me of corporate espionage and theft of proprietary information." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and Maria could hear Jonathan's breathing, quick and angry. "I'll call you back," he said finally, and hung up. 20 minutes later, her phone rang again. "The letter has been retracted," Jonathan said without preamble. "The accusations have been withdrawn, and you're no longer under investigation." "What happened?" What happened is that I discovered my legal department was taking orders from someone other than me. What happened is that I found out there are people in my own company who think they can manipulate me and my decisions. Patricia wasn't working alone. No, she wasn't, and neither are we. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's something I need to show you. The next day, Maria found herself back in Jonathan's office, but this time she wasn't alone. Sitting around the conference table were a half-dozen people she didn't recognize, including a woman who introduced herself as an investigative journalist from the Boston Globe and a man who turned out to be a federal prosecutor specializing in corporate fraud. "And Maria," Jonathan said, "I want you to tell these people everything you discovered about the Roxbury Hospital acquisition." For the next 2 hours, Maria laid out everything she'd learned, every connection she'd made, every piece of evidence she'd gathered. The journalist took notes, the prosecutor asked pointed questions, and Jonathan listened with an expression that grew darker with each revelation. "This is bigger than we thought," the prosecutor said finally. "This isn't just about one hospital or one neighborhood. This is a systematic pattern of fraud and manipulation that could affect dozens of communities across the city." "What do you need from us?" Jonathan asked. "We need access to your internal documents, your email servers, your financial records. We need to trace every transaction, every decision, every communication related to these acquisitions. You'll have it. All of it." The journalist looked up from her notes. "Mr. Whitmore, you understand that this investigation could seriously damage your company's reputation, that you could face significant financial losses and legal liability. I understand that my company has been used as a weapon against communities that deserve protection, not exploitation. I understand that people have been hurt in my name, and I won't stand for it." He turned to Maria, and she saw something in his eyes that reminded her of that night 3 years ago when he'd begged her to tell him her name. "You saved my son's life," he said quietly. "Now you're saving my soul." The investigation that followed made headlines across New England. Federal prosecutors uncovered a conspiracy that involved not just Whitmore Industries, but several other major corporations, real estate developers, and even city officials who had been paid to fast-track zoning changes and permit approvals. Patricia Hoffman was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. So were a dozen other executives, developers, and public officials who had participated in the scheme. The investigation that followed made headlines across New England. Federal prosecutors uncovered a conspiracy that involved not just Whitmore Industries, but several other major corporations, real estate developers, and even city officials who had been paid to fast-track zoning changes and permit approvals. Patricia Hoffman was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. So were a dozen other executives, developers, and public officials who had participated in the scheme. The Roxbury Community Hospital acquisition was not only cancelled, but Jonathan Whitmore announced that his company would be making a $50 million investment in upgrading the hospital's facilities and expanding its services to better serve the community. But the real transformation happened 6 months later, when Maria Santos was offered a position she never could have imagined. "Director of Community Relations," Jonathan explained as they sat in his office, looking out at the city they were both learning to see with new eyes. "Your job would be to make sure that every acquisition, every investment, every business decision we make takes into account the impact on the communities we serve." "You're offering me Patricia's job. I'm offering you a chance to remake what that job means, to turn corporate development into community development." Maria looked at the contract in front of her, at the salary that was more than she'd ever dreamed of earning, at the opportunity to protect other neighborhoods from the kind of exploitation that had almost destroyed Roxbury. "There's one condition," she said. "Name it. I want to establish a scholarship fund for kids from working-class families who want to go to college. Kids like Michael, but who don't have the advantages he was born with." Jonathan smiled, and she saw tears in his eyes. Michael suggested the same thing. He said that if you were going to work for us, we needed to make sure we were worthy of you. He's a smart kid. He gets that from his mother. But he gets his sense of justice from someone else. Someone who taught him that heroism isn't about having power. It's about using whatever power you have to help people who don't have any. Maria signed the contract that day, but not before adding one more clause. Every year, on the anniversary of the fire that had brought them together, Whitmore Industries would host a community service day where employees would volunteer at local hospitals, schools, and community centers. They called it the Maria Santos Day of Service, though Maria protested that it should be named after someone more important. "There is no one more important," Jonathan told her. "You saved my son, you saved my company, and you saved my conscience. If that's not heroic, I don't know what is." 5 years later, Maria stood in the auditorium of Roxbury Community Hospital, watching as Michael Whitmore, now 21 and a senior at Harvard Medical School, announced his intention to specialize in emergency medicine and return to serve the community where his life had been saved. "I learned something important when I was 8 years old," he told the audience of doctors, nurses, community leaders, and patients. "I learned that heroes don't wear capes or have superpowers. They're ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when it matters most." He looked directly at Maria, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face. "And I learned that from a woman who risked everything to save a stranger's child, who disappeared into the night without asking for anything in return, and who later risked everything again to save an entire community from exploitation and greed." The audience rose in thunderous applause, but Maria barely heard it. She was thinking about that night 5 years ago, about the choice she'd made to run toward danger instead of away from it, about how that single moment of courage had changed not just Michael's life, but her own, and the lives of thousands of people she'd never met. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the evening settled into quiet conversation, Maria found herself standing outside the hospital with Jonathan and Michael, looking up at the building that had become a symbol of everything they'd fought to protect. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been walking down Marlborough Street that night?" Jonathan asked. Maria considered the question, thinking about the chain of events that had led them all to this moment. "I think someone else would have heard Michael's screams. I think someone else would have run into that fire, but they didn't," Michael said. "You did. And that made all the difference." Maria smiled, remembering the frightened child she'd carried through smoke and flames, seeing in his place this confident young man who was dedicating his life to healing others. "You know what I think," she said. "I think we all saved each other. You taught me that heroism isn't about being invisible or asking for nothing in return. It's about standing up and fighting for what's right, even when it's scary, even when the odds are against you." "And what did we learn from you?" Jonathan asked. "That wealth and power are only worth having if you use them to lift other people up. That success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give back." As they walked away from the hospital that night, Maria thought about her mother, healthy now and living in a small apartment near the harbor, about the scholarship recipients who were studying medicine and law and social work, about the communities that had been protected from exploitation because someone had been willing to speak truth to power. She thought about the girl she'd been, invisible and struggling, working 3 jobs just to survive, and she thought about the woman she'd become, visible and powerful, using her voice to protect others who couldn't protect themselves. The fire that had brought them together had burned away more than just a building. It had burned away the barriers between their worlds, the assumptions about worth and value and who deserves to be saved. In the end, Maria Santos had learned the most important lesson of all, that heroism isn't about saving someone else. It's about saving the part of yourself that believes in justice, in compassion, in the possibility that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage over comfort. And sometimes, when you save someone else's child, you end up saving your own soul. The last thing Maria heard as she walked home that night was the sound of laughter coming from the hospital behind her, the sound of life continuing, of healing happening, of hope being born in the place where she'd first learned that heroes aren't born, they're made, one choice at a time. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the heroes in your own life or the moments when you've had to choose between safety and courage, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Share your story. Tell us about a time when someone's kindness changed your life, or when you had the chance to be someone else's hero. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this remind us that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or fame or power. It's the simple human capacity to care about each other, to risk something for a stranger, to believe that everyone deserves to be saved.